Jake Morrison stared at the view screen in disbelief. The alien structure floating in space before him was enormous, easily 10 times the size of their ship. It hung in the darkness like a massive crystal, catching the light from the distant star and splitting it into colors he had never seen before. He had been flying military spacecraft for 8 years, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. "Are you seeing this?" Claire Bennett's voice crackled through his helmet speaker. She was standing right next to him in the shuttle, but they always kept their communication systems active during away missions. Protocol demanded it. "Yeah, I'm seeing it," Jake replied. His hands moved automatically over the controls, keeping their small shuttle at a safe distance from the structure. "Command is not going to believe the footage we're sending back." Claire pressed her face closer to the window. She was a scientist, trained to observe and document, but even she seemed overwhelmed. "The energy readings are off the charts. This thing is alive, Jake. Not like a living creature, but it's generating power and responding to our presence. The structure had appeared on their sensors 3 days ago while their main ship, the Endeavor, was mapping this sector of space. Captain Hayes had authorized a small team to investigate. Jake volunteered immediately. He always volunteered. It was better than sitting on the ship doing nothing. Claire had insisted on coming too. She said this was what she had trained her whole life for, and she wasn't going to miss it. They had left the Endeavor 6 hours ago with 2 other crew members, Peters and Lou. But when they got close to the structure, something strange happened. A section of it opened up like a mouth and a beam of light shot out and hit their shuttle. The next thing Jake knew, he and Claire were separated from Peters and Liu. Their shuttle was pulled inside the structure, and now they were sitting in what looked like a docking bay. "I don't like this," Jake said. He was already running diagnostics on their shuttle systems. Everything showed green, but he had a bad feeling in his gut. Military training taught you to trust that feeling. Claire was gathering her equipment. She had 3 cases full of scanning devices, sample collectors, and recording instruments. "This is first contact, Jake. Of course it feels weird. We just need to stay calm and follow protocol. Protocol says we wait for backup when something pulls us into an alien structure against our will," Jake pointed out, but he was already unbuckling his harness. He knew they weren't going to wait. Claire was too curious, and honestly, so was he. They sealed their suits and opened the shuttle door. The atmosphere outside registered as breathable, but they weren't taking chances. The docking bay was huge and empty except for their shuttle. The walls were made of the same crystalline material as the outside, and they glowed with a soft light that seemed to come from within. "Stay close," Jake said. He had a sidearm on his belt, though he doubted it would do much good against whoever built this place. Still, it made him feel better to have it. They walked across the bay to the only visible exit, a large circular opening in the wall. As they approached, it dilated open like an eye. Claire stopped to scan it, muttering readings into her helmet recorder. Jake kept watch, his hand near his weapon. Beyond the opening was a corridor that curved away in both directions. The walls here were transparent in places, showing glimpses of other chambers and rooms. Some were empty. Others contained things that Jake couldn't identify. Strange equipment, maybe, or art, or something else entirely. "Which way?" Claire asked. Jake pointed left. "That way slopes upward, might lead to a control center or observation deck." They walked for 20 minutes, passing dozens of rooms and corridors. The structure seemed designed for beings roughly their size, which was both comforting and strange. Doors opened automatically as they approached. Lights brightened when they entered a room and dimmed when they left. It was like the place knew they were there and was guiding them somewhere. "This feels like a zoo," Jake said suddenly. The thought had been nagging at him, and now it crystallized into words. "Look at the layout. Separate chambers, observation areas, controlled environment. This is a facility for keeping things." Claire stopped walking. She looked around with new eyes, and Jake saw her expression change behind her helmet visor. "Oh no, you're right. This is a research station." Before Jake could respond, the corridor ahead of them shifted. The walls moved like liquid, reforming into a new configuration. A room appeared where there had been solid wall a moment before, and Jake felt the floor beneath his feet moving, carrying them forward whether they wanted to go or not. "Jake!" Claire grabbed his arm, but there was nothing to hold on to. The floor was smooth and frictionless. They slid into the new room and the corridor behind them sealed shut. Jake immediately tried to find a way out, but the walls were seamless. The room was circular, about 20 meters across with a high ceiling. The walls were transparent, and on the other side, Jake could see them. The aliens. There were dozens of them, standing in what looked like an observation gallery. They were roughly humanoid in shape, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. But that was where the similarity ended. Their skin was covered in scales that shifted through different colors as they moved. Their eyes were large and dark without visible pupils. They wore no clothing, but their bodies were decorated with intricate patterns that might have been tattoos or might have been natural markings. They were watching Jake and Claire with obvious interest. "Specimens acquired," a voice said. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, and Jake's translation implant struggled to process it. "Behavioral study commencing." Claire was already scanning the walls, looking for weaknesses. Jake joined her, running his hands over the smooth surface. It was warm to the touch and slightly yielding, like touching living tissue. "There has to be a way out," he said. He tried to keep his voice calm, but his heart was pounding. He had trained for combat, for ship emergencies, for 100 different disaster scenarios, but he had never trained for being a zoo animal. Hours passed. The aliens watched them constantly, never seeming to tire or lose interest. Devices floated in the air around them, recording everything. Jake and Claire tried everything they could think of. They shouted at the aliens, demanding to be released. They searched every centimeter of their prison for a way out. They tried to break the walls with tools from Claire's equipment cases. Nothing worked. When they grew tired, cushions appeared from the floor. When they grew hungry, a section of the wall opened and food emerged on a tray. It looked like protein bars and water, though Jake suspected the aliens had synthesized it rather than raiding their shuttle supplies. "They're studying us," Claire said. She was sitting on one of the cushions, her helmet off now that they had confirmed the air was safe. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. "This is what I do to lab animals: create a controlled environment, provide for their needs, and observe their behavior." Jake paced the perimeter of the room for the 100th time. "We're not lab animals, we're human beings. There are laws about this, even in space." "I don't think they recognize our laws," Claire said quietly. On the second day, the aliens began showing them images. Holographic projections appeared in the air, 3-dimensional and incredibly detailed. At first, Jake didn't understand what he was looking at. Strange creatures engaged in what looked like elaborate dances or rituals. It took him several minutes to realize what he was actually seeing. "They're mating displays," Claire said. Her voice was flat, emotionless, the way it got when she was trying to stay professional about something disturbing. "Different species, different reproductive behaviors. They're showing us their research." Jake felt cold. Why would they show us this? But he already knew the answer. He could see it in the way the aliens were watching them more intently now, the way new devices had appeared in the observation gallery, the way the lighting in their chamber had changed to something warmer and more intimate. Claire's hands were shaking as she worked with her scanner. She had been analyzing everything she could detect about the structure, the aliens, their prison. Now she was focused entirely on decoding the data streams that flowed through the walls. Her implant was translating some of it, but it was slow work. "I think I know what they want," she said finally. It was the 3rd day of their captivity, and they had barely slept. The aliens never turned off the lights completely, never gave them real privacy. "Jake, I need to show you something." She pulled up the translated data on her scanner's screen. Jake read it twice, hoping he was misunderstanding. But the meaning was clear. These aliens were xenobiologists, researchers who studied reproduction across different species. They had apparently been collecting specimens from across the galaxy for years, maybe centuries. And humans were simply the latest addition to their collection. The data explained their expectations in clinical detail. They wanted to observe human mating behavior. They wanted to document the process, the biological responses, the social dynamics. And based on the patterns Claire had identified in their data, They wouldn't release their specimens until they got what they wanted. No, Jake said firmly. Absolutely not. We'll find another way out. But Claire had already tried everything. The walls couldn't be broken. Jake refused to accept their situation. He spent hours examining every surface of their prison, looking for any weakness or flaw in the design. The walls were seamless and smooth, regenerating themselves whenever he managed to scratch or dent them. The floor was equally impenetrable. Even the places where food appeared were sealed tight when not in use, impossible to pry open. Claire worked with her equipment, trying to find a technological solution. Her scanner was sophisticated, designed to analyze alien environments and technologies, but it gave her nothing useful. The crystalline material that made up their prison seemed to operate on principles that human science didn't fully understand. It was partly biological, partly technological, and completely beyond their ability to manipulate. "We've been here 4 days," Claire said. She was lying on one of the cushions, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't slept properly since their capture, and it showed in her face. "The Endeavor must have declared us missing by now. They'll be searching." Jake nodded, though he wasn't sure how much good it would do. The structure had pulled them in effortlessly. If their ship tried the same approach, they might end up captured too. And even if Captain Hayes decided to attack the structure, Jake doubted their weapons could damage it. The aliens who built this place were clearly far more advanced than humanity. The aliens themselves continued their constant observation. They never seemed to sleep or take breaks. They just watched, recording everything with their floating devices. Sometimes they would gesture to each other, their scales flashing in what might have been a form of communication. But they never tried to communicate with Jake and Claire beyond that initial message. The holographic displays continued too. Every few hours, new images would appear, showing different species engaged in reproduction. Some were vaguely familiar, resembling Earth animals in basic body structure. Others were completely alien, creatures that made no biological sense to human eyes. But the purpose was always clear. The aliens wanted Jake and Claire to understand what they expected. "They're increasing the pressure," Claire observed on the 5th day. She had noticed that the intervals between displays were getting shorter, the images more explicit. "They're getting impatient." Jake slammed his fist against the wall in frustration. It absorbed the impact without even vibrating, like hitting water. "Let them be impatient. We're not performing for them." But he could see the stress building in Claire. She was a scientist, rational and methodical, but even she had limits. The constant surveillance, the lack of privacy, the implicit threat in every holographic display. It was wearing her down. That evening, as they picked at the food the aliens provided, Claire finally voiced what they had both been avoiding. "What if there's no other way out?" she asked quietly. Her eyes were fixed on her food tray, not meeting Jake's gaze. "What if they really won't release us until they get what they want?" Jake set down his own tray. "Then we wait for rescue. The Endeavor won't abandon us." The Endeavor is a science vessel with minimal weapons. If they attack this structure, they could get destroyed. And we don't even know if Captain Hayes knows where we are. We were pulled inside so fast. "So what are you suggesting?" Jake asked, though he already knew. Claire was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm suggesting we consider all our options, including the one they want us to take." Jake stood up abruptly. "No, I'm not having this conversation." "Jake, please, just listen to me." Claire stood too, facing him across the small space. "I've been analyzing their behavior. They're not cruel. They provide for our needs. They haven't hurt us. This is purely scientific for them. They want to observe and document." "That doesn't make it right," Jake said sharply. "We're not lab rats. We're people. We have rights." "Rights mean nothing to them," Claire said. "They probably don't even understand the concept. They see us as specimens, interesting animals to study. And from their perspective, what they're asking isn't unreasonable. They want to see natural behavior." Jake shook his head. "I can't believe you're actually considering this." "I'm considering survival," Claire shot back, her voice rising. "I'm considering that we might die in here if we don't give them what they want. I'm considering that our crew might get killed trying to rescue us. I'm considering all the possibilities, Jake, which is more than you're doing. They stood glaring at each other, the tension thick between them. It was their first real argument since being captured, and Jake realized how much stress they had both been under. They were cracking, exactly as the aliens probably expected. He forced himself to take a deep breath and lower his voice. I'm sorry. You're right that we need to think about all possibilities. But Claire, this isn't just about survival. It's about who we are. If we give in to this, we're letting them define us. We're accepting that we're just animals to be studied. Claire's shoulders sagged. I know you're right. I just feel so helpless. Jake moved closer and put a hand on her shoulder. The aliens watched this too, he knew, recording the gesture and probably analyzing it for meaning. He hated that they couldn't have a private moment, couldn't comfort each other without an audience. We'll find another way, he said with more confidence than he felt. We just need to keep thinking, keep looking for weaknesses. That night they lay on opposite sides of the chamber as usual. The aliens had provided 2 sleeping areas, clearly expecting them to use separate spaces. Jake stared at the gently glowing ceiling and tried to think of solutions. But his mind kept returning to Claire's words. What if there really was no other way out? He must have eventually fallen asleep because he woke to Claire's voice in the darkness. Jake? Are you awake? Yeah, he said, sitting up. The chamber was darker than usual, though not completely black. He could still see Claire's outline across the room. I've been thinking about what I said earlier, she began, about considering all options. I was wrong to suggest we should just give them what they want. You were right. It's not about survival. It's about maintaining our humanity, our dignity. Jake felt relief wash over him. I'm glad you see it that way. But I've also been thinking about the situation from a different angle, Claire continued. What if we can use their expectations against them? What do you mean? Claire moved closer, sitting down near Jake's sleeping cushion. Even in the dim light, he could see the intensity in her eyes. They expect certain behaviors from us based on their observations of other species. But humans are unpredictable. We don't always follow biological imperatives. We have complex social structures, emotional bonds, personal choice. I'm listening, Jake said. What if we pretend to comply? Make them think they're getting what they want, but actually use that time to study them. I've noticed they get more focused, more intent, when they think something interesting is about to happen. Their attention narrows. Maybe that's when they're vulnerable. Jake considered this. It was risky, but it was the first real strategy they had developed. You mean fake them out? Make them think we're going to mate, then use their distraction to find a way out? Exactly. They're scientists, Jake. They get tunnel vision when they think they're about to observe something significant. I do it myself in the lab. You become so focused on the specimen that you forget about everything else. It was a clever idea, Jake had to admit, but it also meant playing a dangerous game. What if they call our bluff? What if they realize we're faking and punish us? They haven't shown any tendency toward punishment, Claire said. They're observers, not controllers. They want natural behavior, not forced compliance. If we can convince them we're acting naturally, they'll focus on recording and documenting. Jake thought about it for several minutes. It went against his instincts to play along with their captors in any way. But Claire's logic was sound. They needed an advantage, and this might be their only chance to get one. Okay, he said finally. But we need to plan this carefully. We can't just improvise. We need to know exactly what we're looking for and how we're going to exploit their distraction. They spent the next hour whispering together, developing their strategy. Claire explained what she had observed about the aliens' behavior, the patterns in their attention, the moments when they seemed most focused. Jake contributed his tactical training, thinking about timing and execution. By the time they finished planning, Jake felt more hopeful than he had in days. They had a plan. It might not work, but at least they were taking action instead of waiting passively for rescue or surrender. Claire stood to return to her sleeping area, but hesitated. Jake, thank you for not judging me earlier, for what I suggested. We're both under stress, Jake said. We're both trying to survive. There's nothing to judge. She nodded and moved away. Jake lay back down, his mind racing with possibilities. Tomorrow they would begin their plan. Tomorrow they would turn the tables on their captors. But as he was drifting off to sleep, Claire's voice cut through the darkness once more. This time it was barely a whisper, so quiet he almost didn't hear it. If we mate, they'll let us go. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then, without warning, the lights went out completely. The chamber plunged into absolute darkness, darker than it had been at any point during their captivity. And in that darkness, Jake heard something he hadn't heard before. Jake was on his feet instantly, his military reflexes overriding the disorientation of complete darkness. He could hear Claire moving too, the sound of her breathing faster than normal but controlled. She was scared, but she wasn't panicking. That was good. Panic would get them killed. I'm here, Claire called back. Don't move too fast. We don't want to run into each other in the dark. Jake stood still and let his eyes adjust, but there was nothing to adjust to. The darkness was absolute, without even the faint glow that had been present during their previous nights. The aliens had removed every source of light from the chamber. They're trying to manipulate us, Jake said, forcing his voice to stay calm, creating an environment that mimics privacy. Darkness, isolation, it's a classic behavioral manipulation technique. He heard Claire moving, the soft sound of her equipment being activated. A moment later, a faint blue glow appeared across the chamber. Her scanner was providing the only light now, barely enough to see by, but better than nothing. In the dim blue illumination, Jake could see Claire's face. She looked determined rather than frightened, which matched the tone of her voice when she spoke. My readings show they've changed the atmospheric composition, she said, studying her scanner's display. Nothing dangerous, but they've increased certain compounds, pheromones maybe, or chemical compounds that affect mood and behavior. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. They're trying to drug us into compliance. Probably, Claire agreed. She was tapping commands into her scanner, running analysis after analysis. But the concentrations are low. I don't think it will have much effect on us, especially now that we're aware of it. Human biology is pretty resistant to this kind of manipulation when we're consciously fighting it. Jake moved carefully across the dark chamber until he reached Claire's position. Together they examined the walls where the door should be, using the scanner's light to search for any sign of the locking mechanism. But the wall was as seamless as ever, giving no indication that a door even existed. Tell me something, Jake said as they worked. That last thing you said before the lights went out. Was that part of our plan? Were you trying to trigger their response? Claire was quiet for a moment. Honestly? I don't know. The words just came out. Maybe I was testing them, or maybe the stress is getting to me more than I realized. Well, it definitely got a reaction, Jake said. Question is, what do we do now? They spent the next hour exploring their prison in the darkness, using Claire's scanner as their only light source. The blue glow was eerie, casting strange shadows and making everything look unreal, but it revealed something they hadn't noticed before. Jake, look at this, Claire said, directing her scanner's light at a section of wall. The crystalline structure here is slightly different. See how the patterns don't quite match the rest? Jake leaned closer. She was right. The wall's surface showed a faint irregularity, barely visible even with direct light on it. What does it mean? I'm not sure yet. But it's the first real variation we've found in the walls. Maybe it's a weak point, or maybe it's where the door mechanism is hidden. Claire pressed her scanner against the wall, running deeper scans. Jake left her to work and moved around the perimeter of the chamber, testing every section of wall he could reach. In the darkness, with only the blue glow from Claire's scanner to guide him, the chamber felt smaller and more oppressive. He could almost feel the weight of the alien structure around them, thousands of tons of crystalline material holding them captive. But something else was bothering him. The aliens had been watching them constantly for days, never giving them privacy. Now they had cut the lights and sealed the door, creating the illusion of privacy. It didn't make sense unless they were still watching somehow. Claire, are they still observing us? He asked. She checked her scanner. I don't detect any visual recording devices, but that doesn't mean they're not there. They could be using technology we can't detect. Or they might have sensors built into the walls themselves. So this whole darkness thing might be an act, Jake said. They want us to think we have privacy, but they're still recording everything. Almost certainly, Claire agreed. The question is why? Why change their approach now? Jake thought about it. Frustration. We haven't given them what they want, so they're trying a different method. They think if we believe we're alone in the dark, we'll be more likely to engage in intimate behavior. Which means they still don't understand humans very well, Claire said with a hint of grim humor. Most humans don't perform better when they're frightened and manipulated. They continued their exploration, but the hours dragged on with no progress. The door remained locked. The walls showed no weaknesses except for that one irregular section, and even that revealed nothing useful in Claire's scans. The temperature began to drop slightly, not enough to be dangerous but enough to be uncomfortable. They're increasing the pressure, Claire observed, making the environment less comfortable, maybe hoping we'll seek warmth from each other. Jake would have laughed if the situation wasn't so serious. These aliens really need a course in human psychology. But as more time passed, Jake began to understand the effectiveness of the aliens' strategy. It wasn't about the darkness or the cold or even the chemical compounds in the air. It was about the isolation, the lack of control, the constant uncertainty. Even knowing they were being manipulated didn't make it easier to resist. He found himself sitting close to Claire, not for warmth or comfort, but simply because she was another human being in an alien place. They talked to pass the time, keeping their voices low even though they knew the aliens were probably listening. Jake told her about his childhood in Colorado, about learning to fly small planes with his father when he was 12 years old. He talked about joining the military, about the long training missions that took him away from Earth for months at a time. He even told her about the girlfriend who had left him because she couldn't handle the distance and uncertainty of his career. Claire shared her own stories. Growing up in Seattle with parents who were both scientists, the pressure to succeed academically, the relationship she had avoided because she was so focused on her work, her fear that she had traded a normal life for a career that might never amount to anything significant. And now here we are, she said with dark humor, finally making first contact with aliens, and it turns out they just want to watch us have sex. The universe has a twisted sense of irony. Jake found himself laughing despite everything. When we get back, you should write a paper about this. The title can be, Why First Contact Protocols Need to Include Guidelines for Dealing with Voyeuristic Alien Scientists. Assuming we get back, Claire said, and the humor drained from her voice. Jake, we need to be realistic. It's been 6 days now. If the Endeavor was going to rescue us, they would have done it by now. Maybe they're planning something, Jake suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. Claire was quiet for a long moment. The blue glow of her scanner illuminated her face, showing exhaustion and worry. I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about maintaining our humanity and dignity, and you're right, that's important. But I'm also thinking about survival, not just for us, but for our species. What if this is a test? What do you mean? What if these aliens are evaluating humanity, deciding if we're worthy of contact or if we're just animals to be studied and dismissed? What if our refusal to cooperate makes them think we're primitive or irrational? Jake shook his head. Or what if our refusal shows them we have self-determination and won't be controlled? Claire, we can't second-guess this. If we start trying to please them or perform for them, we've already lost. I know, Claire said softly. I know you're right. I'm just tired, Jake. Tired of being watched, tired of being trapped, tired of feeling helpless. Jake understood. He felt the same way. The anger that had sustained him for the first few days was fading, replaced by a deep weariness. But he couldn't let himself give in to it. That was what the aliens wanted. Let's focus on the plan, he said. You found that irregular section of wall. What else have you learned from your scans? Claire pulled herself together, focusing on the technical problem. The crystalline material is definitely responsive to biological electrical fields. I've been documenting how it reacts when we touch it, when we move near it, even when we're just in proximity. It's subtle, but there are measurable changes in the energy patterns. Could we use that somehow? Jake asked. Maybe. The problem is scale. The changes we cause are tiny, compared to the overall energy output of the structure. It's like trying to affect an ocean by throwing in a cup of water. But what if we could amplify our effect somehow? Or focus it? Claire considered this. Theoretically, yes. The human brain generates electrical activity, especially during certain kinds of mental processes. Complex thinking, emotional responses, memory formation. If we could coordinate our brain activity somehow, create patterns that the structure isn't designed to handle, we might be able to cause a larger disruption. Jake felt a spark of hope. That's something. That's more than we had before. It's just a theory, Claire cautioned, and even if it works, I have no idea what kind of disruption it would cause. We could end up making things worse. Or we could end up opening that door. Claire blinked against the sudden brightness, her hand instinctively shielding her eyes. Jake noticed her scanner was still running, still collecting data even after 18 hours of continuous operation. The device must have been running on backup power for the last few hours, but Claire hadn't let it stop. That determination was part of why they were still fighting instead of giving up. The aliens seemed frustrated. Jake could read it in their rapid movements, the way their scales flashed through colors faster than before. They had tried their manipulation tactic, creating darkness and isolation, and their human subjects had failed to comply. Now they were clearly reassessing their approach. They're getting desperate, Claire observed. She was studying the aliens through the transparent wall, her scientific training helping her read their body language despite their alien nature. Look at how they're clustering together, gesturing rapidly. They're arguing or discussing strategy. Jake watched too. After days of observation, he had learned to pick up on subtle cues. What do you think they'll try next? I don't know, but we need to be ready. Our plan depends on them being distracted, focused on us in a specific way. If they change their approach completely, we might lose our opportunity. Over the next 2 days, the aliens tried several new tactics. They changed the temperature more dramatically, swinging from uncomfortably hot to uncomfortably cold. They altered the lighting, creating what might have been romantic or intimate atmospheres in their alien understanding. They even tried introducing scents into the air, though these seemed to be random experiments rather than calculated attempts at manipulation. Through it all, Jake and Claire maintained their routine. They talked, they exercised to stay physically fit, they worked on their plan. They deliberately stayed close to each other, letting the aliens observe what appeared to be growing intimacy, but never crossing the line into what their captors actually wanted to see. It's working, Claire whispered during one of their planning sessions. They sat back to back in the center of the chamber, ostensibly resting but actually coordinating their strategy. Their attention is getting more focused. They think something is building between us. Jake felt uncomfortable with the deception, even though it was necessary. Are we sure this is the right approach? Using their expectations about human behavior against them? Do you have a better idea? Claire asked, not unkindly. We've tried everything else. This is our best chance. She was right, Jake knew. They had spent days searching for physical weaknesses in their prison and found none. They had tried to communicate with the aliens and been ignored. They had hoped for rescue and none had come. This plan, risky as it was, represented their only real opportunity for escape. Claire's theory was based on observation and analysis. The crystalline structure that made up their prison was responsive to biological electrical fields, particularly neural activity. The aliens had built their research station using this technology, probably because it allowed them to monitor their specimens without invasive equipment. But that responsiveness could also be a weakness. The key is coordination, Claire explained for the 10th time, making sure they both understood. We need to generate specific patterns of brain activity simultaneously. Not the same patterns, but complementary ones that will create interference in the structure's systems. Like two radio signals jamming each other, Jake said. Exactly. The structure is designed to read and interpret biological signals. But if we flood it with contradictory signals, complex overlapping patterns that don't fit any of their expected categories, we might be able to overload the local systems. And that will do what exactly? Claire's expression showed both hope and uncertainty. Best case scenario, it disrupts the power systems in this section and opens the door. Worst case, nothing happens and we've wasted our chance. Middle case, we cause enough chaos to create an opportunity we can exploit. Jake accepted this. In military operations, you rarely had perfect information or guaranteed outcomes. You made the best plan you could with what you had, and then you executed it with commitment and discipline. On the 7th day of their captivity, they decided to make their attempt. The aliens were clearly at the limit of their patience. Their observation had become more intense, more invasive. New devices had appeared in the gallery, probably representing a shift to more aggressive monitoring or perhaps attempts to influence their subjects more directly. If we don't act now, They might try something more extreme, Claire said. I'd rather take our chance with our plan than wait to see what they do next. Jake agreed. Tonight, then. We'll wait until they think we're settling down for sleep, when their attention is most focused. They spent the day in careful preparation. Claire double-checked all her calculations, making sure she understood exactly what kind of neural activity they needed to generate. Jake rehearsed the mental exercises she had taught him, practicing the techniques for generating complex brain patterns while remaining physically calm. The aliens watched everything, but Jake hoped they would interpret the day's activities as normal routine rather than preparation for escape. As the lighting in the chamber dimmed to simulate evening, Jake and Claire moved to the center of the room. They sat facing each other, close enough to touch but not quite touching. The aliens' attention intensified immediately, their scales flashing with what Jake now recognized as excitement. They think this is it, Claire whispered. They think we're finally going to mate. Then let's use that, Jake replied. Let's give them a show while we work. What happened next would have looked intimate to any observer, human or alien. Jake and Claire leaned closer together, their hands meeting between them, their eyes locked. But what was really happening had nothing to do with physical intimacy. Claire began to guide Jake through the mental exercises, her voice low and steady. Start with mathematical sequences. Complex ones, fractals, and recursive patterns. Let your mind work through them simultaneously. Multiple calculations running in parallel. Jake focused. He had always been good at math, a skill that had served him well in flight school. He started with simple Fibonacci sequences and then branched out, creating overlapping patterns in his mind, letting the numbers cascade and interact. Good, Claire said. She was monitoring his neural activity with her scanner, while generating her own patterns. Now add emotional memory. Think about something that made you angry. Really feel it while maintaining the mathematical thinking. This was harder. Jake reached back to a memory of his father's death, the frustration and helplessness he had felt. The anger surged up, but he kept the mathematical patterns running too, his mind working on multiple levels. The walls around them began to flicker. The change was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but Jake saw Claire's eyes widen with hope. It's working, she breathed. Keep going. Now add creative visualization. Imagine something impossible while maintaining everything else. Jake pictured himself flying through space without a ship, his body moving through the stars like a bird through air. The image was vivid and impossible, and his mind knew it was impossible, but he held on to it anyway while the mathematics continued and the anger simmered, and all three patterns of thought collided and merged in his consciousness. The walls flickered more noticeably now. The aliens in the observation gallery were moving frantically, their excitement turning to alarm. Devices were being activated, commands being shouted in their incomprehensible language. Don't stop, Claire said urgently. She was sweating with effort, her own mind working through similar exercises. We need to push harder. Add fear, add hope, add every contradictory emotion you can think of while keeping the cognitive patterns running. Jake did as she instructed. He thought about his fear of dying in this alien prison and his hope of seeing Earth again. He felt pride in their resistance and shame at their helplessness. He experienced love for humanity's achievements and hatred for the aliens who caged them, every emotion at once contradictory and overwhelming, while his mind continued to run complex calculations and imagine impossible scenarios. The effect was dramatic. The crystalline walls were pulsing now, colors shifting rapidly through spectrums that human eyes could barely process. The floor beneath them vibrated. Somewhere in the structure, an alarm began to sound, a high-pitched wail that hurt Jake's ears. Almost there, Claire gasped. Her face was pale with effort, but her eyes were determined. One more push. Think about them, the aliens and us humans, and every difference and similarity at once. Make your mind hold all of it, all the contradictions, all the complexity. Jake reached deep inside himself, pulling up every thought and feeling he had about their situation. He thought about the aliens' curiosity and their cruelty, their advanced technology and their fundamental misunderstanding of humanity. He thought about himself and Claire, two people who barely knew each other but had become partners in survival. He thought about humanity's drive to explore space and the horror of becoming specimens in someone else's laboratory. His mind held all of it at once, contradictions and all, a massive cascade of neural activity that no single coherent thought could contain. The wall in front of them cracked. It was a small crack, barely visible. The crack spread faster, branches extending across the transparent wall like lightning frozen in glass. The aliens on the other side scattered in panic as pieces of their observation gallery began to fail. Their floating recording devices dropped from the air, crashing to the floor of their chamber. The lights flickered throughout the visible sections of the structure. Jake felt dizzy from the mental effort, but he forced himself to maintain the complex patterns of thought. Mathematics and emotion, memory and imagination, fear and hope all swirling together in his mind. Beside him, Claire was trembling with the strain, but her voice remained steady as she guided them both through the final push. "Almost there," she gasped. "Just a little more." The wall shattered. The sound was like 1,000 wind chimes breaking at once, a crystalline cascade that echoed through the chamber. Pieces of the transparent wall fell inward, and suddenly there was a gap large enough to climb through. "Go!" Jake shouted, releasing Claire's hands and pushing her toward the opening. His head was pounding from the mental exertion, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Claire grabbed her scanner and equipment cases, moving fast despite her exhaustion. Jake followed right behind her, climbing through the jagged opening in the wall. Sharp edges caught at their clothing, but they pushed through. The observation gallery was in chaos. The aliens were trying to activate emergency systems, their scales flashing red and orange in what Jake now understood was alarm. But the cascade failure they had triggered was spreading. Other chambers throughout the visible sections of the structure were opening, walls failing, systems shutting down. "This way," Claire said, consulting her scanner even as she ran. The device's map showed the route back to their shuttle, though whether the shuttle would still be functional after what they had done to the structure was anyone's guess. They ran through corridors that were now flickering and unstable. Other specimens were emerging from their chambers, creatures from dozens of worlds all suddenly freed by the system failure. Some were running like Jake and Claire. Others seemed confused, staying near their prisons as if uncertain what to do with freedom. An alien researcher stepped into their path, its scales flashing rapidly through colors that might have been commands or pleas. Jake didn't slow down. He had spent 7 days as their captive, and he had no intention of stopping now. He dodged around the alien, pulling Claire with him, and kept running. Behind them, the structure groaned. The sound was deep and ominous, vibrating through the floors and walls. The cascade failure was affecting the structural integrity now, not just the containment systems. If they didn't get out soon, the entire research station might collapse. They reached a junction that Claire's map showed should lead to the docking bay, but the corridor was blocked by a section of collapsed ceiling. Jake looked around frantically and spotted another route, a maintenance passage that ran parallel to the main corridor. "Through here," he said, not waiting for agreement. He pulled open the access panel, and they squeezed through into a narrow passage lined with conduits and crystalline structures that pulsed with erratic energy. The passage was barely wide enough for them to move single file. Jake led the way, his heart pounding, his breath coming in gasps. Behind him, he could hear Claire's equipment cases banging against the walls as she struggled to keep up. They emerged into a larger corridor, and suddenly Jake recognized where they were. This was near where they had first been captured, where the structure had pulled them in against their will. If they could just reach the docking bay, their shuttle might still be there. They turned a corner and found themselves facing a group of aliens. These were different from the researchers they had seen before. Larger, with scales that had a metallic sheen, guards maybe, or a security response team. They moved to block the corridor, their body language clearly hostile. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a piece of debris from the floor, a shard of broken crystalline material, and threw it at the nearest alien. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it created enough distraction for him and Claire to dart past the group and keep running. Alarms were wailing throughout the structure now, and emergency lighting had activated, bathing everything in a pulsing red glow. The floor shook beneath their feet, and Jake realized the station was tearing itself apart. Their neural disruption had triggered a feedback loop in the crystalline systems, and now the cascade failure was beyond control. They burst into the docking bay, and Jake felt a surge of relief when he saw their shuttle still attached to its docking port. It looked intact, though warning lights were flashing on its exterior. "Start the pre-flight," Jake ordered as they ran toward the shuttle. "We need to be ready to launch the second we're aboard." Claire was already activating systems remotely through her scanner, By the time they reached the shuttle's airlock, the engines were warming up. They threw themselves inside and Jake sealed the hatch behind them, while Claire strapped into the pilot's seat. All systems showing green, Claire reported, her fingers flying over the controls. Whoever built our shuttle did a good job. It survived whatever happened to the rest of the structure. Jake dropped into the co-pilot seat and took over the navigation systems, disconnecting docking clamps, preparing for emergency departure. Through the shuttle's viewports, they could see the docking bay beginning to deform. The crystalline walls were buckling, creating gaps that opened onto the vacuum of space. Other freed specimens were trying to find their own ways out, some succeeding, others getting caught as sections of the structure collapsed. "I've got a clear path," Jake said, plotting their escape route on the navigation display. "Hold on." He fired the shuttle's thrusters, pulling them free from the docking port with more force than was strictly safe. The shuttle lurched, its hull scraping against the warping structure, but then they were clear and accelerating away. Behind them, the alien research station was coming apart. Entire sections were breaking away, crystalline structures shattering and drifting in the darkness. The specimens that had escaped scattered in all directions, each seeking their own way home. Claire activated the communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Shuttle Alpha 7 to Endeavor. Do you copy?" Jake Morrison and Claire Bennett requesting immediate pickup. "Repeat, requesting immediate pickup." Static answered her for long seconds. Then a voice crackled through and Jake felt emotion surge in his chest at the familiar sound. "Shuttle Alpha 7, this is Endeavor. We copy, confirm your identity and location." Claire laughed, the sound edged with hysteria and relief. "Endeavor, this is definitely us. Claire Bennett and Jake Morrison. We've been held captive for 7 days in an alien research station. We just escaped and the station is falling apart. We're transmitting our coordinates now. Confirmed, Shuttle Alpha 7. We have your position. Are you in immediate danger?" Jake checked their sensors. The research station was still collapsing, but they were far enough away now that the debris field wouldn't reach them. "Negative, Endeavor. We're clear of the immediate danger zone. Copy that. Maintain current heading. We're coming to you. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity, but Jake used the time to run full diagnostics on their shuttle while Claire compiled her data. Everything she had recorded over the past 7 days, all the scans and observations, would be invaluable for understanding what they had encountered. They were xenobiologists, Claire said quietly, watching the destruction of the research station through the viewport, scientists studying reproduction across different species. They weren't evil, just completely immoral in their research methodology. "They kept us in a cage," Jake said flatly. "They tried to manipulate us into performing for them. I don't care if they thought they were doing science. What they did was wrong." "I know," Claire agreed. "I'm not defending them. I'm just trying to understand. We're going to have to report this, Jake. We're going to have to tell humanity that our first contact with intelligent alien life was with scientists who saw us as lab specimens." Jake considered this. It wasn't the first contact scenario anyone had hoped for, not the peaceful meeting of equals, not even the hostile confrontation that military planners had prepared for, just cold observation by beings who saw humans as interesting animals. "Maybe that's important information," he said finally. "Maybe humanity needs to know that intelligence doesn't automatically mean wisdom or morality. These aliens were advanced enough to build that station, to travel between stars, to study dozens of species. But they never stopped to consider whether their subjects might deserve rights and dignity. The Endeavor appeared on their sensors, accelerating toward them at maximum speed. Jake had never been so happy to see their ship. When they finally docked and climbed out of the shuttle into the familiar corridor, Jake felt his legs almost give out from relief. Captain Hayes was waiting for them, along with half the crew. The captain was a stern woman in her 50s, gray-haired and commanding. She looked them both over with concern. "Lieutenant Morrison, Dr. Bennett, thank God you're safe. We've been searching for you since your shuttle disappeared." "The alien structure pulled us inside," Jake explained. "We spent 7 days trying to escape. We saw the structure breaking apart.